Good afternoon, Playmates. Welcome to our third session of today. For some, there's no introduction needed. Chris Knight of the Radical Anthropology Group has been a good friend of Communist University for many years. He's here today to talk to us about revisiting historical communist visions. Over to you, Chris.
Always good to be with communists, real communists. Obviously, we've been having problems recently. We're not living in very encouraging times. Tiny bit of good news, at least from my point of view, is that my book has been translated into German by a retired German factory worker. I'm so happy about that. And his view is that this is one of perhaps the greatest theoretical work of Marxism since Marx and Engels. He can't understand how nobody seems to know about it. Absolutely extraordinary that this work hadn't been translated before. And I've asked my close long-term colleague and friend, Volker Sommer, who's of course German, worked many years with Camilla at University College London, primatologist. I've asked him to write a preface to the German edition and hopefully to find a publisher. So, communist visions. I think all of us are aware that while we're canvassing, campaigning, struggling to explain the communist vision, maybe the deepest problem we come up against is this idea that we're unrealistic, that any such vision has never worked, that we're coming up against really deeply rooted aspects of human nature, maybe even that poverty, war, oppression, all these inequalities and so on. I mean, we can see them in chimpanzees. We are closely related to chimpanzees, aren't we? Maybe you can't change human nature, not even a revolution could change human nature. Okay, we've had revolutions. We've had the English Revolution, the French Revolution, the German Revolution, the Russian Revolution. But you know, somehow, at the end of the day, maybe they worked for a bit, but let's face it, they didn't work. What evidence have you got, you communists, that revolution has ever actually worked? So all my life, I've been working to explore the revolution that worked, the human revolution. How do we know that this revolution worked? We know it because here we are. We are closely related to other great apes genetically, but while we are so closely related, just look at the transformation. Chimpanzees, they are extraordinarily despotic, if you like. Common chimpanzees, as Jane Goodall was horrified to find, because she got very fond of her chimps in Gombe Stream. But they are hierarchical, extremely male-dominated. Groups of chimps patrol their boundaries, they're territorial. Occasionally they will intrude into a neighboring chimpanzee group, and they're not very good at killing other chimpanzees, but they can do it. Just sheer force of numbers, stamping on the isolated chimp, the enemy chimp they happen to find. And primatologists, you know, have pointed to a sort of layer on the ground, a layer of skin and bone. what's left of a defeated chimpanzee killed by other chimps. It's true that chimpanzee social dynamics, gender dynamics differ, but still the argument is that given that the close genetic relationship, we're being unrealistic in expecting a revolution to transform things in a fundamental way. But we humans, that quite again different from chimps, we have so many features which can only emerge from a turning upside down of chimp-style, primate-style relationships of dominance. One of them is actually it's our eyes. We have what's often been called cooperative eyes. So think of most monkeys and apes, particularly adults. Think of an adult gorilla, for example. Its eyes are like black on black. You can't see what they're thinking. You can't detect direction of gaze. It's almost as if a dominant male gorilla wants to know what other gorillas are thinking by looking in their eyes and working out what they must be looking at. But what it doesn't want to reciprocate, that doesn't need to be transparent. It reminds me of mobsters wearing sunglasses. You can look out from those sunglasses, but those that are trying to work out what you're looking at to read your mind through the eyes, they can't do it. So our eyes are exactly the opposite. We have eyes as if designed to be transparent, with the white sclera, the white background, the lozenge shape, with the dark iris. We can immediately detect by looking at somebody else's eyes what you must be thinking of, because what you must be looking at. And so our eyes are for looking in, allowing others to see, to detect direction of gaze, and through that do this thing called mind reading, as opposed to simply needing to look out. That's one feature. Another feature is the strange cackling sound that you often hear humans make when you get close to a bunch of people who are relaxed in a student calf or a hunter-gatherer camp. The sound you hear is laughter. This strange sound. The nearest you can get to it with chimpanzees is a kind of cackling, mobbing, wah barking sound. Wow, 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 wow. It's quite aggressive. But it's rhythmic. And so chimpanzees, wah barking, they can build up a kind of a rhythmic, intimidating sound. And of course, human laughter, it can be cruel. We can laugh because somebody else is having problems. We can laugh at the sort of classic kids joke, the civil servant slipping on a banana skin. We laugh because it's not mum, it's somebody we don't care about. And it's funny to see somebody else falling flat on their face. So there is something cruel or aggressive about laughter, but essentially most human laughter, it's as if we've faced a threat, we're responding to that threat the way chimpanzees might, with sort of mobbing sounds, rhythmic mobbing sounds, to sort of gather some strength and try and intimidate the enemy. But human laughter, it's almost as if we've been doing that, and then suddenly the threat dissolves. And as the threat that's been provoking that mobbing sound disappears, we've carried on with the sound in a relaxed way. And in that sense, what happens is that the assertive mobbing sounds, in becoming relaxed, reverse their meaning. We're doing it simply now to enjoy our togetherness. And that actually relates quite closely to the smile that we have. What's the nearest you have in chimpanzees to a smile? Probably most of you will have noticed this. It's called a fear grin. So a chimp again, so a chimp being threatened by a dominant animal will bare its teeth in a nervous way. Well, the human smile is like a fear grin, when the fear's gone. The fear grin continued after the threat has dissolved. And rather like my argument about laughter being mobbing once the threat has dissolved, and we carry on mobbing, but we're doing it simply for the pleasure of being together. The human smile is like a fear grin without the fear, when the threat has been removed, and we smile. It's like, so in both cases, we have not just a kind of relationship or a kind of graded modification of what went before. I'm arguing it's actually a reversal. I'm arguing that the smile is a reversal of the fear grin. Laughing is a reversal of mobbing. Something's happened to reverse the dynamics to produce these core recognizable features of distinctively human nature. And then, I mean, there's plenty of others I could mention, but of course, possibly the most extraordinary feature of all is language. A lot of people think that, I mean, it's kind of understandable that because everything else distinctive of human nature has evolved in some way gradually through Darwinian natural selection. If you ask others about, well, how did language evolve, they'll just say, well, we haven't really thought about it, but presumably it was useful. Language must have evolved because it was a good thing to have, much better to have language which can convey in great detail all the intimate details of thought. So much an improved system compared with the screams, hoots, barks, and so on of our close chimpanzee and other great ape relatives. And so the idea is that because language is kind of better, more efficient, better, more accurate, more precise in conveying details of thought, clearly, as we've got large brains and we're quite clever animals, it was natural that we would develop language. Because after all, what can humans do by way of cooperating with each other without language? We use language all the time for so many different reasons. Of course, language was going to evolve. So it may come as a surprise to you to know that the origin of language is today considered by scientists to be possibly the hardest problem in science. There is absolutely no agreed explanation for the emergence of language. And those who have attempted to explain language as some kind of modification of the kind of screams and barks of our primate relatives, they've come completely unstuck. There's no way you can get from A to B. If you wanted to develop language, you wouldn't start with, say, the chimpanzee pant hoot, and maybe I'll do my little pantomime show at this point here, because I want to just make the point by doing my best. I'm not all that good at this. Other people have done a much better job, but it's something like. And now imagine a whole bunch of chimpanzees doing that. And kind of maybe just imagine your God wanting to police humans with language. I think you'll agree that you wouldn't start from there. I mean, language has got is absolutely different. With a pantu, you're saying the same thing again and again and again. It's emotional, it has to be loud, all sorts of things about it, whereas speech isn't emotional. It can be emotional, of course. We can shout and stamp and sing and all that stuff, but you know, I'm talking to you now. I could be talking quite quietly, and little details of thinking are coming across, and absolutely all animal signals are what we call graded or analog. The listener is interested in the more or less differences between the sounds. So how loud is that signal? How often is it repeated? What kind of angle or emotion? But on an analog gradual scale, is this signal coming across to me for the listener to work out whether it's worth responding to it or not. So it's like analog means more or less on like a continuum. One of the things which Chomsky was absolutely right about, although he didn't invent it, it came from Roman Yakovson, a Russian amazing linguist, is that at the fundamental level, both phonological and semantic, language is a digital system. Digital means off, on, nothing between. nothing in between the off and the on. So with language, you have voicing, you can voice a consonant, or you can remove the voicing. You can nasalize or remove the nasalization. You can close the lips or open the lips. And those digital differences, off, on differences, in turn produce equally digital distinctions on the level of semantics or meaning. So, I mean, a simple example would just be something as easy as, well, the difference between, we'll meet you tomorrow, we'll eat you tomorrow. You can see out it's a life or death difference with just removing a consonant, the first consonant in the sentence. Most linguists would use something like pin versus bin. You have been, but you're closing your lips or making by switching your voicing on. Remove the voicing, you've gone from pin to bin. And when we hear somebody saying something in between, we just think, come on, can I hear that again? I'm a bit deaf. Can you say it again? Was it pin or bin? And there's nothing sort of in between. If you make a sound in between, you haven't got a slightly bin-like pin or a slightly pin-like bin. Pin and bin are utterly different, nothing in common. And you just flick between one or the other at no cost. No system of animal communication works like that. How do we know that the human revolution worked? It's because here we are with our eyes, with our capacity to laugh, and with a capacity for language, which again I agree with Chomsky on. Chomsky being, I know on the left people think of Chomsky as a sort of anarchist activist. Actually, Chomsky was the fundamental, almost inventor of modern theoretical linguistics. You talk about theoretical linguistics, the name Chomsky just came up because he was regarded as the author of scientific linguistics. So now and again, I have to mention Chomsky, even though I've written a book on him, which he wasn't very keen on, and the various disputes about that. But the point I'm making is that language is an instinct in the sense that every little child is born with a kind of brain and components of the brain and like a 2-year-old kid picks up probably the most complex theoretical construct imaginable, the grammar of a language. The grammar of English, French, Russian, Swahili, whatever. No linguist has ever really worked out the grammar of any language, but a little child somehow picks it up as if it knew it already. That's what Chomsky means, or Steven Pinker means by the language instinct. The child, during that period called the critical period for language acquisition, it's almost as if it knows the basis of all the grammars of the world already, and it just has to know which language is the ambient one. Where am I? I'm in France or in Japan, and sort of picks it up, and then, oh, I know Japanese, I know French, and it would look through a sort of whole list of different languages and come up with the one which is appropriate in that environment. That is far-fetched. That particular version of the language is far-fetched, but it's certainly true that when you're 19, 20, even 14, 15, we find it very difficult to pick up a new language, most of us. And getting the accent right is actually pretty much impossible. Whereas a 2-year-old does it like it, it's like it does it like it looks around and walks and everything else. It's part of being human. Well, it's very odd because it's very hard to find any trace of that instinct in our close genetic relatives, say the chimpanzees or bonobos. There's no trace of a language instinct. You can sort of teach them American Sign Language, whatever kind of sign language you want to teach it, using gestures. But with its mouth and its voice, it doesn't get it. And even with the gestures, there's no grammar there. I mean, one of the most complex sentences ever uttered by a chimp was, gimme, 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 gimme fruit, gimme fruit, gimme, gimme, something like that. So where's the language instinct? And how did it get there? And how could it have got there in such a short period of time? Because most scientists think that language only became the kind of thing we have around the time of the speciation of Homo sapiens, around 150 to 200,000 years ago. Well, we get a very complex instinct evolving through normal Darwinian selection. You need a lot longer than that. So it's still quite a mystery. The concept I'm using, the human revolution, the revolution that worked, we know that it worked because here we are, has been around quite a while. When I first began writing my book in the 80s, the consensus among archaeologists was that something extraordinary happened in Europe around 40,000 years ago. So the argument was that we evolved biologically in Africa, but we didn't get smart till we hit Europe. And when our ancestors got into Europe, something extraordinary happened called the symbolic explosion, the Upper Paleolithic Revolution. And the evidence for that is the amazing, wonderful cave art, all the wonderful figurines. I mean, just an explosion of creativity, which we can see when we go to the Cantabrian regions, Spain and France, and look at particularly the cave paintings. And so that was argued to be the human revolution. It happened in Europe, or it happened with the kind of collision between original ancestors in Africa coming to Europe, where the Neanderthals were already the natives, in some kind of interactive process or some kind of process. For some reason, there was this revolution which was sparked. Rather unfortunately, my book contains significant traces of that era, which was the standard paradigm of the time, even though a friend of mine, Ian Watts, who met up with somebody else at the Socialist Workers' Party, Marks of Southern School, was already tapping on my shoulder, saying, Chris, that's all wrong. Actually, the human revolution began in Africa. It's just that it began in Africa a lot earlier than 40,000 years ago, and the art was not cave paintings. Ian is now probably the world expert on what's called the ochre record of human evolution. Just to explain that, when you look at archaeology, you're looking at human origins with the eye of an archaeologist. There's nothing tells you that symbolic culture has arisen. Symbolic culture would include language with all sorts of other things, of course, ritual and ceremony and I don't know. But nothing tells you that symbolism has emerged other than the ochre record, which means that quite a while ago, Camilla's more of an expert on this than I am, and I'm going to ask her to say a few things about it at the moment. But 500,000 years ago, let's say, you begin to see something rather strange, which is that our ancestors were treasuring and using specially chosen, brilliantly blood red bits of ochre, modifying that ochre and using it as artist's material, as a pigment. And what Ian was aware of, I think I had the idea as well, actually, to be fair to me, in my book, the artistic designs weren't put on walls, they were on the body. The ochre would have been used as body paint. A very good word for body paint, which Camilla's always used, is cosmetics. So think of that blood red ochre rather as perhaps lipstick, nail varnish, making you look great. Actually, probably a better word, I think, than looking pretty would be women's wall paint, looking kind of sexy, but also very powerful and assertive, and perhaps sacred and inviolable. We'll perhaps come on to that. Be that as it may, Ian was telling me that the first art was developed while our ancestors were still in Africa, and it was body art. After that came other items of personal adornment. It is significant that the original form of, if you like, mining for valuable material wasn't mining for gold, for diamonds, for precious metals. It was mining for this most valuable substances, brilliant red ochre. And then later in history, much later, of course, when we began mining for silver and gold, again, the point of the silver and gold was personal ornamentation, to wear bracelets, necklace, armor, to look great on the surface of the body, clearly for some kind of ritual purpose. I'm going to go back a bit and sort of change the subject, but not change it, because in order to get to what I'm going to be asking Camilla to talk about, to understand it all, we have to escape from a pretty cataclysmic, endlessly repeated error of communists, Marxists, and the left in general. And that is a phobia against genetics. Probably you've all heard of Stalin's version of genetics. Because the word Lysenkoism really bells. Stalin had, I mean, for all kinds of reasons, we won't go into exactly why, but his version of Marxism was that it's kind of ideological and you use it for your political ends. And in his case, the idea was that environment change, human nature doesn't really exist, it's plastic. And to validate that idea, you have I won't go into it all, but Lysenkoism, the kind of Lamarckian idea of genetics, contributed, I won't say caused, but contributed to famine in Russia, and particularly in Ukraine, cataclysmically bad harvests, and it was the opposite of what Marx and Engels were set out to do when they established Marxism. It's really important to know that Engels made it very clear, but he was speaking on behalf of Marx when he said this. He said, the more dispassionately and disinterestedly science proceeds, the more it finds itself in harmony with the interests of the workers. So stick with the science. Don't worry about the politics. The politics should come out of the science. And it's true that we tend to think of Marx as primarily I mean, maybe we don't here. I think that colleagues here probably don't do this, but the idea that Marx was fundamentally political. Marx was a scientist. Of course, if your science comes up with the wrong answers, if your science comes up with answers which are inconvenient to the establishment, you'll find yourself involved in a political struggle. Think of Copernicus, think of Galileo, think of the finding that the Earth is round and it moves. Well, that was very inconvenient as far as the papal establishment was concerned. So, of course, the powers that be would have regarded Galileo as a political troublemaker. And of course, Bruno was burnt at the stake for being another troublemaker. So what Marx was interested in was establishing an independently and using the methods of science, a science of what it means to be human. In other words, anthropology. That is the definition of anthropology. Anthropology is nothing other than the study of what it means to be human. Marx and Engels were anthropologists. But the point I'm making was that they were putting science first and insisting that any politics has to come out of the science. And just think about how current a topic that is. When in the United States at the moment, we have Donald Trump and his supporters shutting down all the scientists, dismantling precious scientific institutions, because the science is coming up with a message that survival of planet Earth, keeping a habitable planet, is incompatible with free market capitalism and a lot of other things about the current order. So what Marx said, actually, in addition to say that science has to be autonomous, was that when communism comes into its own, it discards its political cloak. It's trying to say that, of course, when we're engaged in a battle, we have to engage in politics, just as today. Supposing you're a climate scientist, and there are plenty of climate scientists who are beginning to do this nowadays, in order to preserve the autonomy, the political independence and autonomy of science, scientists, I'm obviously in a different branch of science, but myself and Jerome Lewis and the people I work with were scientists. Because we need to avoid politics interfering with the science, doesn't mean that we evade our political responsibilities. It means we have to engage precisely in a political battle to defend the political independence, the autonomy of peer-reviewed, objective, internationalist science. But that's the thing about science, modern science, is it's about the most internationalist form of knowledge we have. Because if you're a scientist, anything you come up with, any theory you come up with, it's going to be criticism, very, very correctly criticism. It's a leveling process. Every scientist has to endure quite a difficult struggle to survive against all the criticism you're going to receive. And the point is that just being English or American or French or Japanese isn't going to help too much, because the criticism has come from all over the planet. So science itself has an intrinsic internationalism to it. And so I've always argued that rather than say, as I find too many Marxists do, Marxism is a science, I'm saying, no, just because you're a Marxist doesn't mean you know everything. It's not good saying Marxism is science and I'm a Marxist. You have to be a scientist, understand the science, put that first, and essentially anybody can do that, by the way. And then out of that commitment to science should come your revolutionary politics. And if your revolutionary politics doesn't come out of that science, there's kind of something wrong with it. It's not really genuinely revolutionary in the sense that Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels intended. Now, why that's important, in recent times, there's been this, I mentioned genetics and sort of genetics phobia with Lysenkoism. A very similar version of that, I mean, not exactly Lysenkoism, but not too different, has infected, I mean, I could mention them, in the olden times, 1980s and so on, militant tendency. What are they called now, the militant group? Anyway, Spew, okay. Yeah, yes, but also the Socialist Workers' Party, just about the whole left, all the different Trotskyist groups on the left, without exception. When an astonishing, wonderful theoretical breakthrough in Darwinism occurred, they all denounced it as fascism, racism, blah, blah, blah. One of the points Camilla makes is that, just think about it. In recent years, and I say recent, I'm getting a bit old. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, all the major developments in science which have vindicated, for example, Friedrich Engels is the origin of the family, private property of the state. When I say vindicate, I don't mean every detail of that rather amazing introduction to anthropology. Just think of the primary things which Engels said. Early human kinship was matrilineal. Early human childcare was collective. Humans lived in matrilocal groups with mothers together looking after each other's kids. Women lived with their mothers. They didn't have to move away and get under their husbands or fathers of control and be isolated from their kin for their support. All those fundamental features, the most controversial features, by the way, of Engels's view of anthropology and our origins, they've been vindicated by science. But guess what kind of science? Oh my God, not sociobiology, not selfish gene theory. Yeah, selfish gene theory. The left read the front cover of a book by that rather wretched character called Richard Dawkins. He's pretty wretched, but then, I'm sure Newton wasn't a very nice guy, but his theories of motion and so on were pretty damn good. So I'm just saying, just because you don't like Richard Dawkins, and I'm not at all fond of the guy, the Selfish Gene is a must-read book for anyone interested in Darwinism origins. It's a wonderful book, brilliant. Genes are selfish. What does that mean? It means a gene, what is it, deoxyribonucleic acid, is a molecule which makes a replica of what? It makes a replica of itself. That's all. But the argument wasn't that genes make us selfish. It means that a gene is designed to replicate self, and a gene which starts doing the wrong thing producing copies of alternatives to itself at its own expense, that would be an X gene, a has-been gene, extremely rapidly. Every gene has to make copies of what? Itself. And so out of that came the idea of fitness. Fitness doesn't mean you look great, you look sexy, you've got nice muscles. Fitness means success in getting your genes into the future. Everything around us, all the butterflies, caterpillars, trees, humans, people, cats, dogs, blah, blah, blah. The reason they're here is because their ancestors were pretty damn good at getting their genes into the future. I mean, thank goodness genes are selfish in that sense. We wouldn't be here if they weren't. Okay, so it's got nothing to do with selfishness. But the left just read the front cover of the selfish gene and decided that they didn't like it because it was an argument for selfishness. The reason I'm saying that is because this new body of theory, it's been superseded a bit. I mean, nowadays people aren't quite so narrow or one-sided about selfish genes. There's selection at individual level, yes, but there's also selection at other levels. But still, the fundamentals of that body of theory are completely revolutionary, because that body of theory was the alternative to what previously was the view of Darwinism, which was group selection. And group selection argued that, yes, Darwinism was all about competition and the survival of the fittest, but before Dawkins and others, obviously Dawkins was the inventor of it all, I won't go to, many other people who in previous decades come up with the basis of selfish gene theory. But before that, most mainstream versions of Darwinism were one or another version of group selection. That means competition is between different groups. So you have the fittest group, and of course the fittest group rapidly turned into the most successful and therefore fit nation or race or ethnicity. So group selection led rather naturally to Nazi thinking and general, racist thinking. And selfish gene theory completely exploded the very idea of race, by the way, because if you can have sex with somebody else and you produce viable offspring, you're the same quote race. But why even use the concept of race? So all I'm saying is that it was hugely revolutionary and liberating, and yet nearly all the left kind of didn't get it. And what's so interesting, let's just take one particular issue. Engels argued that early human childcare was collective, because he had the idea that women lived with their mother, lived with their sisters, looked after their children cooperatively. Communism in living was, among other things, the sharing of children, as well as sharing of food and living space and so on. Okay, just about the whole of 20th century official anthropology was designed to discredit Morgan, Engels, and Marxism. Malinowski made a famous statement in the 30s. I won't read it out, it would take too long. But she said, if ever it came to the humans, our people, abandoning the monogamous nuclear family as the basis of all culture and order. In other words, if we denied group, if we came to accepting group motherhood as even compatible with human order, in his view, his words are sort of here, we will face a catastrophe worse than the French Revolution or the Russian Revolution. So, and then after that, the dominant theory within mainstream kinship was that the nuclear family, based on marriage, therefore based on a man's conjugal rights in a woman, and therefore giving him paternity certainty, those features were sort of fundamentals of human nature. Okay, well, how have we managed to get back to Engels? Sarah Hrdy. She is probably the world's foremost Darwinian theorist when it comes to humans these days. And she wrote a wonderful book, I think it was published in 2009, called Mothers and Others, and pretty much convinced everybody against all that background of ideology. But indeed, humans are, if you like, a cooperative species. We cooperate. That's one of the reasons for our success. What do we cooperate in? Well, according to Sarah Hurdy, is the most difficult job of all, looking after kids. Cooperative childcare was actually fundamentally the primary thing which made us human. And then we have another, Kristen Hawkes, another selfish gene theorist, not quite, I mean, Sarah was actually the pioneer, the fundamental pioneer of selfish gene theory where it concerned humans, but Kristen Hawkes developed what's called the grandmother hypothesis, arguing that the first thing humans did when we began walking on, well, Homo erectus, she argued, mothers would be. Perhaps I should go to. Do you want me to go to Camilla?
Well, I
Do you feel like taking over?
Probably yes, but I can probably tell the story.
Go on. Camilla's more of an expert on some of these things than I am.
Talk about these brilliant, amazing women. Mine with the picture, all right?
Get near the mic.
I'm near the mic. Are we okay? Okay, so yeah, just to take on from where Chris has left off, in defense of sociology and selfish gene theory, particularly working through the work of women scientists, and selfish gene theory, as Chris says, it took away from any idea of race. Race is not admitted as even existing. It exists as a social construct. It isn't existing in real biological reality. It's not what selfish gene focuses on at all, but what selfish gene focuses on is very much sex and sexual conflict, because the ways that one sex or the other sex gets their genes in the next generation is a different way. It's going to be different, particularly for mammals, particularly for mammals like us, like primates and hominins. So these beginning their career, young female, maybe some of them bourgeois feminists, liberal feminists, young women scientists going out to work with primatologists, with primates like Sarah Hurdy, seeing the realities of sexual conflict among primate species that could give them models for reality among hominin ancestors. Chris has put Sarah Hurdy first, and that's true because she was working with with the people who are absolutely working on selfish gene theory at the beginning, Rob Travers and so on, Bob Travers and so on. But Kristen Hawkes, in some ways, was closer to the evolutionary track. And she worked for long years with people that I've had the luck to also work with, a Hadza in Tanzania, to build the grandmother hypothesis model. Now, Kristen Hawkes, because of the Hadza, she already could see in action the reality of cooperative childcare in hunter-gatherer camps. Hunter-gatherer camps are like machines for cooperative childcare in context of total egalitarianism, actually. And she could see the matrilocality, mums living with their mums as part of the social structure of those camps. Sarah Hurdy, surprisingly, although she really focused on starting with monkeys and inferring from monkeys the sexual strategies that females use to particularly protect themselves, their babies, from males as risks of infanticide. So Sarah Hurdy was beginning to explain with her very first book, The Woman That Never Evolved, why was there so much sex going on? What were female primates doing with all that sex? They're only having like 5 or 6 babies at the end of the road. Why do they need hundreds and hundreds of matings to be getting those babies? Because they have to actually change male behavior and get males to think, well, I might be the dad of that, so I'm not going to hurt that baby. That was a major aspect of female primate behavior, which Sarah Hurdy was very clear about. And it's impossible to get to that, to understand that, without understanding selfish gene theory. Yeah, certain males will be wanting to get their genes in the next generation. If a female primate is breastfeeding a young offspring for months on end, as far as that incoming male is concerned, if that is not his offspring and he knows it because he's never had sex with that female, he will go in and potentially get rid of that baby if you can. And it's very easy with young primates. So this was a big observation that Sarah Hrdy had, really working on with A Woman That Never Evolved, with Mother Nature, her book at about 2000, published about 2000, 2001, showing female strategies, focusing on female primate strategies so much. But already by that stage, Kristin Hawkes, working with the Hadza, with her colleagues, archaeologists and evolutionary anthropologists, originally ethologists like Nick Lurton-Jones, was understanding the importance of living with mum. And we actually sat down with Sarah Hrdy late 90s in a conference we went to over in the US, and the main self-regime, the sociobiology conference, HBES, and she was still at that time believing that because other great apes tend to have females moving from their home original natal group, females move, and the males left over in, say, a chimp group, maybe gorilla group, will tend to be related. She thought, well, that must be true about humans also, hominin ancestors also. And we were working on her and saying, yeah, but what about hawks? Yeah, but and what about what we know about hunter-gatherer camps? And so she was then getting more information from people who were really with hunter-gatherers in seeing the flexibility of hunter-gatherer residence and kinship, seeing that girls, young women coming to their first child or their second child would tend to stay with mum. Maybe by the time they've got to a couple of young offspring up and running, then maybe they'll go off to the camp where their dad comes from. But he has had to come to where she is and do work called bride service with his mother-in-law, her mum, as his boss. He's working to show that he's going to be a good dad. And then when the mother-in-law says, okay, his mother-in-law, her mother, says, okay, you can go off and visit your folks and maybe let them move a bit more. But that is the classic default strategy for certainly African hunter-gatherers and many other very egalitarian hunter-gatherer groups around the world. It isn't always everywhere with all hunter-gatherer groups, but it definitely is for the low-latitude groups. Okay, so Kristin Hawkes was building the grandmother hypothesis, arguing why do we have menopause? We can explain why that would have evolved. That grandmothers no longer, they have longer lifespan than their reproductive lifespan. At a certain point, they're no longer reproducing, instead of which they can increase their fitness, increase their genes getting into the next generation by help to a daughter, particularly. So this grandmother hypothesis was going to start explaining all these strange things about human life history, the menopause being a major aspect of human life history. It's really quite unrivaled amongst the rest of the animal kingdom, with the exception of a few whales, who are very long-lived as well, and have long post-reproductive lifespans. Okay, so just to kind of keep going forward as to why this is cooperative breeding that Chris has talked about, which I call babysitting, basically, with Sarah Hrdy. It's babysitting which made us human, made us really at the beginning, genus Homo erectus, started to make us human. And Sarah's come up with this really wonderful explanation for the human mental, emotional ability to mesh mental states, emotional states, be able to look each other in the eyes and understand what each other's thinking. So our cooperative eyes, she's argued, comes out of a situation of being able, a mother being able, she's not just a single mum anymore, she's able to hand over her baby to someone else. The first someone else she would be handing that baby to would be her mum, the most trustworthy person. Now, among chimps, as among many other primate species, infanticide remains a very serious risk. And with chimps, well, the major reason why chimpanzees can't do babysitting, they can't let their baby, they won't, they're hyper-possessive, as described by Sarah earlier. They won't let their baby go to another female in the group, is that other female's not their relative. This is saying that characteristics like cooperative eyes, characteristics like our ability to read each other's minds, and characteristics like menopause are coming out of a situation which originally implies, with genus Homo, with Homo erectus, implies living with female relatives fundamentally. And it's very difficult to envisage any other situation working and giving rise to these features.
It just happens to be what Engels said.
Well, yes, yeah, he didn't get all the reasons right, and I'm going to tell you why. One of the main things, I mean, he got some reasons right about the kind of overcoming of male jealousy. That is an important part of the story. But yeah, he was not too clever in his pronunciations about brain sizes and different. He was being a bit racist and emphatically so.
Lots of it's good for your brain.
Well, but also he was pointing to brain size difference. It was bloody Huxley, Darwin Huxley, who was doing very racist examinations of brain sizes, and unfortunately Engels picked up some of that. Brain size, Chris has mentioned the features which really are part of our bodies, minds and souls, which show that we evolved as an egalitarian genus and species, effectively. Genus first, species following that. Chris has mentioned the cooperative eyes, and that you cannot envisage cooperative eyes being there in species that are evolve on a model of capitalism, exploitation, coercion, some people, and inequality. The cooperative eyes wouldn't be there. You need to have a long lasting evolutionary period of egalitarianism to get them into place. Cooperative eyes, Chris has talked about laughter, has talked about language, but did not actually speak about the most materialist aspect, which is our very large, extraordinarily large brains, and how, and we can actually trace the kind of the degree of how far had this egalitarianism gone in relation to the brain sizes that our hominin ancestors went to. And this is not because the brains enabled hominins to do these nice or clever things. It's because of the energy requirements. So it's really being materialist. It's really being, understanding the energetics needed for a female, for a mother, to be able to get her child up and running with a brain size that already by the age of 7, very large brain growth through the age after being weaned, through the age of 4 to 5, really by the age of 7, it's an adult brain size. Children are growing up at that at such a rate with that brain size. The mother is the one, it's down on her to make sure that her child is sufficiently well nourished, sufficiently well provided, that can be achieved. Okay, so that is the materialist story of human evolution. Now, if we look at the charts, which I don't have here, you're going for the hominins from the Australopithecines, or Australopithecine ancestors, into early Homo, basically trundling along at a level of brain size which is underneath what is known as a grey ceiling. And this is a key threshold, which is telling us about some of the most important steps of humans. What grey ceiling means is if a mother is totally on her own, facing all the risks of potential sexual conflict with males, potential risk to her offspring, all the problems of social life, which are, they've got costs, they've got benefits, there could be competition, Machiavellian intelligence is what rules primate worlds. She, by herself, can raise an offspring to a grey ceiling, which is being worked out by leading primatologist Carol Van Schaick, as about 600 to 700 cc of cranial capacity, it's cubic centimeters cranial capacity. And we see all the Australopithecines, they're upright, walking, bipedal, apes, brain sizes not that much bigger than other great apes today. And this, even for the beginnings of early Homo, these brain sizes are underneath the grey ceiling. What we can infer from that is basically no one's really helping mum. She's not getting the help. But somehow, between about 2 to 1.5 million years ago, we just smashed through the grey ceiling with Homo erectus emerging as a species with pretty much our make and shape, limb length and body size, posture, abilities to walk and run long distances, and brain size not yet at the same, as large as later Homo sapiens, later Neanderthals and Denisovans, but already sizable, already gone right through the grey ceiling. What that means effectively is Sarah Hurley's cooperative breeding. Mothers, the babies that mother is looking after have got to have others. There's got to be others. And who are those others is then the huge question. And why Kristen Hawkes' work's been so important is it is a challenge to the assumptions that it'll be mummy and daddy doing the cooperative breeding. Oh yeah, mummy and daddy will help because he can see, oh, that poor little infant has got to have help with its brain size. I'm not saying Sarah Hurley's written recently Father Time and an important work looking at aspects of fatherhood, but that is not the first person to turn to for a mother who's under pressure of having a larger brain. She's under pressure for larger and larger brained offspring. Those mothers aren't necessarily going to trust daddy first. They're going to trust their own mum first. And then by making those alliances with their own mum, they may have better leave and their own sisters, and sticking with mum and their sisters and relatives, and also having brothers around, which is another interesting development of the cooperative childcare hypothesis. Then they have more leverage with males who would be mates. Then they've got alliances to ensure support against males who would be mates, and to get those males behaving nicely and cooperatively instead of chimpanzee-wise being risky and trying to dominate. So what we get after the breakthrough with Homo erectus, somewhat Homo erectus stays around the same level, and then more than 1 million years ago, just about, which is the ancestry for us, Neanderthals, Denisovans. That kind of ancestry, and maybe a species known as antecessor. That is the sort of prime ancestor, and it's prime large-brained human ancestor. And there's another sort of big increase of brain size in the mid-Pleistocene transition, 700-800 years ago. And then from there, there's considerable increase from the 500,000 mark. Now, what we've argued is that that pressure, that natural selection pressure on brain size, whatever the reason for it, there could be a whole lot of explanations for why were our ancestors being selected so strongly for that increase in brain size. And it's the best theory going really is what's called social brain, that it's about the social complexity and the intricacy of negotiating social life, and especially negotiating social life in a highly cooperative, using alliances to ensure that nobody bigger and stronger than you can dominate you. The more that brain size is going up, the more egalitarian, and particularly egalitarian, gender egalitarian, life needs to be, because mothers of those very large brained offspring need the support that enables them to raise those offspring. So we've argued Chris, I don't know if you want to tell more of the story at this stage. I've taken over too much. What is it that is going to, what we need to connect up with, I don't know how long we're meant
It's
to
been
go
an
on
hour
for.
now, that's trouble.
Oh, maybe we need to, well, we just say something about what the human revolution looks like. You told us about the body art that Ian was telling you to look for in Africa. Why is there a record from 500,000 years ago going to Vanderwerk Cave, deep in the hillside, a rail mine working deep in the hillside, contains not just the beautiful red hematite, blood red hematite, but also speculite, which is like glitter and cannot be used for anything else but visual display fundamentally. And that's almost 500,000 years ago. So what are they doing with that? Why are females requiring ritual cosmetics as their strategy? And we've made this argument, we've told this argument before at the Communist University. The key thing for females is to be able to kind of say, confuse males. These are two key aspects. They need backup, they need coalitions, they need alliances. We can see that's already emerging with the babysitting, with the grandmothers, with their sisters living together, pretty much, that's already emerging. They need to confuse males, I never lose sight of the sexual conflict here, confuse males about when they're actually fertile. Keep males hanging around and being useful. You know, all those females, if a male's useful, everyone should have one. Help with the, get the flowers, get the chocolates, help with the shelves, whatever. Females need them. And so they want to put those males to work, doing that bride service that I've talked about with the Hadza camps, that men are working to their mothers-in-law, who's the boss. But suppose there are some would-be dominant males, alpha males, trying to track, well, these females, they're pregnant. I don't need to try with them. These females, they're breastfeeding. I don't need to try with them. How do they know if a young woman is soon going to be fertile? We humans, we have hidden ovulation. It's a very good strategy for confusing males. Males don't know when we're really fertile. You can ask your boyfriend if you've got one, and you check him out. If he knows, he won't. He'll be confused, right? He'll kind of have a guess, maybe suspect, but not really. But there's a big giveaway. And the big giveaway, it turned up on the cover of Chris's book, Menstruation and the Origin of Culture. The way Chris wrote his book, I realized within a couple of years after it was published, he made a big mistake. He, assuming as a social anthropologist, he thought menstruation instantly, it's a no signal, it's taboo, because he's a social anthropologist. But I was working with people like Robert Dunbar, learning primatology and thinking, well, these primates, they menstruate too. They don't have menstrual taboos. It's not exactly a no signal. And if you eliminate the ovulation signal, menstruation is suddenly actually staring the males in the face. She's the one. The next week or so, she's the one who's going to be ready to mate.
Can I just interrupt by saying that Jerome Lewis, working with the Bayaka forest people, just tells me that men are very excited when a woman starts to menstruate, and they have this, it's really sexy. And the theory is that if you get hold of a girl and have sex with her just after a period, you're going to get her pregnant.
That is true of many.
But any other time, kind of, it's not the best time.
It's true about the Hadza, it's true about the Dogon, it's true about so many.
So although in our Western culture we think of menstruation as rather, I don't know, difficult to even talk about and certainly taboo, hunter-gatherers think of it as exciting.
Yeah, because we've got to remember hunter-gatherer women with their slightly later, living a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, slightly later maturity, having a number of babies with breastfeeding that goes on with the Hadza, 2.5 years, 3 years between births, quite typical. So how many times a hunter-gatherer woman actually menstruates is a lot less than women living in a Western lifestyle. That's quite straightforward. We think of menstruation being associated to lack of children, but that is not what hunter-gatherers, African hunter-gatherers will think of it as emblematic of fertility, particularly for a young woman starting to menstruate, and it's construed in terms of a power, of a potency, and yeah. But that's the cultural aspect of it. The biological, genetic, like selfish gene, it's not genetic, it's just that males who are trying to seek young fertile females will hone into it. They will be interested. Oh, that girl, she's the one, right? I'm going to bring her flowers and chocolates, take her off. And so as far as the females are concerned, who are raising these extremely energy expensive babies, they do not want any alpha male taking their young friend, young relative off on safari somewhere. They are going to say, no, she's out, we're hanging on to her. They're going to make ritual celebration around her, which is also absolutely mounting a picket line of saying, no, look, you don't touch, you don't come anywhere near our girl here, she's ours. But because this girl is now menstruating, and if we all join her menstruating with using this cosmetics, this body art, to show that actually together this whole picket line here, looking after this girl in her menstrual hurt here, if we're going to do that and say no, it's because you go away hunting, guys, and come back, and then we'll see what happens. So this is like the picket line that says no, taboo, don't touch. And we're going to then see when you bring what we need. So it becomes, instead of being a one-on-one servicing bride service, it becomes a collective operation of the investor males who do not think of themselves as alpha males trying to grab pussy in Trump's terms. They're the investor males who are absolutely willing to work for those mums and aunties of the girl that they're linked to. So that was really, these were the steps of the human revolution that lead us to predict, in relation to that, that increase of brain size with a species born over 300,000 years ago, becoming just like us by 200,000 years ago, brain size still creeping up at that time. That is the revolution creating Homo sapiens as we are today. And that revolution happening in Africa, we actually can see from the ochre record and the increase, the explosion of the ochre record. We now have the record, we can see on a chart, and literally when I see this chart of how the ochre expands across from south to east to North Africa, in Central Africa, the pigments may be vegetable pigments because there isn't so much ochre there. The hair goes up on the back of my neck because I can see the date of the human revolution in Africa, 160,000 years ago. Suddenly, that ochre just jumps. It goes everywhere. It's right across the continent. It's like a spread of human culture from all these different population centers, north, south, central, south, east, south. Yeah, you're going to finish?
Yeah, so that's the date of the human revolution, 160,000, if anyone wants a date. And Camilla was right, no question about it. The menstruation for hunter-gatherers is a, come on, there's a danger, it was a danger because it signals fertility. Every hunter-gatherer specialist will tell you that. There's a danger that it can actually be divisive for women, and women have to make sure that no dominant male can take advantage of this now, this way of distinguishing between females and picking and choosing between them on the basis of fertility status. So Camilla's absolutely right on that. That's it. I know we have stretched over time. What do I say just to end with?
The human future.
I mean, shall we just stop and have? I mean, it seems a bit of a shame to simply stop. I mean, okay. There's a new a lot of our colleagues have kind of been very, very, I don't know, they kind of know about the theory, the sex tract theory, the menstrual, it's kind of quite well known, but
Female cosmetic
coalitions theory is how we express now, but menstruation is such a taboo in our own culture that somehow one does not talk about it. There are certain things you just kind of, it's dangerous to talk about it because people will misunderstand you. So, and actually what we've argued, of course, right over the years is that that menstruation is connected with the moon. I mean, it's another whole long story. We should take all sorts of time to go into it. But somehow you'll find that feminists just will not even mention menstruation and the moon in the same breath. It's regarded as incredibly dangerous and wrong and misleading, and to even mention the moon in the same breath, even though the actual average length of the human female's menstrual cycle, 29.5 days. Camilla knows all about the details. There's lots of statistics. People have got apps these days. You can get huge sample sizes, 29.5 days. Oh my God, what a coincidence. It's exactly the same time as it takes for the moon to pass through its phases of seed from the Earth. Whereas bonobos have a 14-day cycle, chimps have a 36-day cycle. All the other primates have scattered either less than the rest. The one primate with exactly the length of cycle you predict, if it had benefited females in the past to synchronize the cycles using the moon as the clock, 29.5 days, somehow it's just culturally a taboo to sort of make those connections because, of course, it's not scientific, it links up together the knowledge and all the rest of it. So I'm just saying there are sort of non-scientific reasons why this whole theory is kind of winds people up the wrong way, makes people feel anxious and so on. And then perhaps I'll end with this. Even just to talk about sex strike is regarded as a bit political, or strike action is political. So sociobiologists, they're constantly using metaphors from capitalism, you know, investment, arms, investments, what is it? I mean, cost-benefit ratios, arms races,
trade-offs,
payoffs of that.
Trade-offs.
Concepts taken from economics.
They are economic.
Applied to humans, but somehow when you think about it, all these concepts connected with capitalism, which are used very, very freely. I mean, as soon as you recognise actually, yes, you do have capitalism, you do have bosses, you do have their profits, but you also have strikes, you also have trade unions, you also have resistance. But somehow, as soon as you mention the resistance to capitalism, which has actually always been a part of capitalism, it's always been that resistance. Somehow that's political. So I was just going to mention this. One way of talking about sex strike without arousing political hostility is a new term. It's actually quite a good term because it's somehow more general. It's called, because it applies to other primates and it isn't to humans, it's called coalitionary leverage. And if you use the term coalitionary leverage, it's somehow nice and politically neutral. Coalitionary leverage means some subordinate group of chimps or apes or perhaps hominins have got a resource which those dominating them want. And the leverage is if you can control that resource by forming an alliance and deny them that resource when you feel like it, you can use that as leverage to enhance your own status. And it's now recognized that, I mean, the great ape that's genetically just as closely related to us as chimpanzees is, of course, the bonobo. Bonobos, females have very high status. They're really mostly kind of female-dominated great apes, just as closely related to us. And the females have sex with each other, they bond with each other. Clearly, if bonobo females are having sex with each other, by definition, they're not having sex with males. I wouldn't want to call that a sex strike exactly, because bonobos aren't very good at going on strike. They seem to have, you know, they kind of like to have sex with anything that moves. But still, there's an element of coalitionary leverage in the sense that bonobo females have established their high status by kind of punishing males who are being stupid, unhelpful, threatening their babies. You're not going to get any sex. And the males who are going to get sex are those who are going to please the females by being nice to their babies, not being threatening. Blah, blah, blah. So coalitionary leverage is a useful term. So possibly, I'll perhaps end with this, we should call Chris Knight's sex strike theory the coalitionary leverage theory to avoid getting into political trouble. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.